Things are shaking up at MSNBC. Political analyst Chris Hayes is taking over the network's 8 p.m. weekday slot, replacing Ed Schultz, who will be moving to weekends. Now, the change will be effective April 1st. Hayes will be the youngest of all the cable news hosts on any network and also the most unabashedly progressive host of the three major outlets. Hayes took to Twitter to acknowledge the announcement. You can see it right here on my screen saying, "Welp, no more live tweeting NBA games." Some humor there from Hayes. Joining us to discuss this is HuffPost Washington Bureau Chief Ryan Grim. Ryan, what's behind this shakeup, in your opinion?
Chris is a rising star there. Ed found out yesterday that this was happening. He's going to be moving to 5 to 7 Saturday and Sunday, which will let him stretch his legs more, let him do more kind of news magazine-y investigative pieces about working class and about income inequality. So what they're losing during the week is their strongest kind of pro-labor voice. Right. But Chris Hayes actually addresses inequality and working class issues just as much as Ed does, and does it in a way that brings in more gender and race issues than Ed does. Ed's more likely to have a union president on right. Than Chris would be. Chris is more likely to have somebody who's on the ground.
And Chris also appeals potentially to younger viewers, and there is more diversity, not just in his guests, one would argue, even in the subject matter that he covers. The way Brian Stelter described it is that Chris Hayes is a liberal intellectual, and to your point, that Schultz is more of a champion of the working class. And so perhaps that pairing with Rachel Maddow, who's on at 9 o'clock, is a better pairing.
Chris is also one of the least partisan kind of liberals on MSNBC. A lot of the hosts are going to sway, depending on what the Democratic Party is doing. Whereas Chris is much more of an ideologue.
Right.
He has his worldview, and if the Democratic Party is veering from that, he's going to call them out, and probably call them out harder than Republicans, who he expects less from. But what has made his show so successful, though, is that it's a place where thoughtful ideas are hashed out.
Right.
And that's because he has this longer format, and they're not tied to the news cycle. He's going to be on the spin cycle at 8 p.m. That's you have to churn through right. a lot of the daily news there. Mm-hmm. It's even faster at 8 p.m. than it is at 10 p.m. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of adapts his slower, more thoughtful approach to the quick pace and the stupid pace
right.
of evening cable.
I like how you frame that.
Right.
I watch it more often than I watch other programs on MSNBC, I'll be honest, and the reason is because of those reasons you stated. The fact that he also covers kind of more ideological stories that are driven by his own perspective. Right. Drones, for example, he's covered more than some of the other hosts, as well as Bradley Manning, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, things that don't always make it elsewhere. Do you think as a result of this time slot and some of the constraints you just described, that perhaps he'll shift away from that?
Well, he knows that his ticket to success has been what you described. He also knows that he's going to have to cram, he has an hour now, whereas he had 2 hours, but he doesn't really have an hour. Mm-hmm. Because if Obama goes to meet the House Republicans, right. he's got to talk about that. If some idiot says something idiotic, he's probably going to have to talk about
right.
that. So that could leave him maybe only a half an hour for discussion at the second half. Whatever, he's going to have to wrestle with how to cram those 2 hours of thoughtful discussion into much less time.
All right. Well, there's a lot of people who want to comment on this. We actually have you guys in our hangout. So why don't we start with you, Egberto? You happy about this move?
Absolutely not. I think it's one of the worst moves MSNBC have made so far. I mean, this guy is an intellectual that need those 2 hours to put his message out. I think Ezra Klein would have made a much better, if they wanted sort of a wonky person at 8 o'clock, they should have put Ezra Klein, because he kind of melds pretty well with Rachel Maddow. Not everybody can do what Rachel does with good information in 1 hour.
Yeah, but don't you think, this is just my opinion, that Ezra's maybe a little too wonky for that time slot, Nagin?
Well, actually, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
No, I agree. I mean, I think he, I don't know, I might be alone in that. I feel that he's requisitely entertaining and still brings a kind of a little bit more of a weightiness and a little bit more of a nerdiness to the time slot that we need, that Ed Schultz just wasn't bringing, and that didn't have the same kind of appeal. And exactly to the demographic that Rachel Maddow appeals to, I think it's a good match.
And Peter, where do you fall on this?
I fall on any time we can put more policy wonks into the prime time outlet. I'm a big fan of it. I think the less partisanship we can find there, the more in-depth intellectual discussions that we can have, I think is the right direction. And I think there's a huge marketplace for that as well.
I agree. I think people want that, and I think that Chris does offer that. But I'm curious if you would have preferred Ezra.
Oh, that's a tough question. I'm a big fan, so I'm not sure that one is necessarily much more preferable than the other. I think either one could have done very well in that time slot.
Very quickly, Ryan, since we have you here, I'm curious, the fact that Bill O'Reilly really dominates that time slot, we know that 8 p.m., of course, a different audience. What do you think that's going to have in terms of an impact on on Chris's show?
I don't know how much overlap there is between the kind of person that would get a kick out of Bill O'Reilly and the kind of person that would sit down and watch Chris Hayes. But it's different. He brings a different approach to cable news. Chris Hayes does, and so maybe people will come just to check it out his first couple weeks, and they'll see, hey, this is something different. I'm gonna stick around for this. But he's certainly not going to outshout Bill O'Reilly, and people who are not shouters end up looking like clowns when they try to be.
Right.
Not that Bill O'Reilly doesn't look like a clown,
Yeah.
but he's much more natural at it.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying.